Matt, you will remember that 40-mile-long convoy of Russian armour north of the city of Kyiv. Well, what seems to have happened is that it stopped several days ago and people couldn't quite understand what was happening with it. Did it have a supply problem? Were the logistics not working? Had they run out of fuel? Well, what satellite imagery that we've seen today suggests is that that column has now split up and it has fanned out. And so those armoured vehicles are now fanned out north, east and west of the capital. And there is a lot of fear that amongst all that armour there will be artillery and that artillery will start to rain down on this city again. That hasn't happened for a few days, and that the Russians will then be poised either to besiege or to move further into the capital. Now, today we went to the capital's biggest children's hospital. It's a 700-bed hospital, but at the moment there's only about 100 cases in there. Some of them are adults because it's now treating everyone, including some of the worst affected children, some of those who are just too sick to leave. And some of the images in our report, viewers may find a little upsetting. On the outskirts of Kyiv, Ukrainian forces move through the woods towards a village where a battalion of Russians has taken up positions. Suddenly, they come under fire.
Продовжуйте наступ, закріпляйтеся на блокпосту.
Continue the attack, hold the checkpoint, he says. This is what it comes down to. Not grand strategy, but an ancient calculation. You must kill one more than the enemy does.
Ще раз повтори. Два.
2 tanks coming in, he says. Repeat, 2 tanks. The Ukrainians hope the agility of their infantry will win over massive Russian firepower, and that they can protect their population against the odds. A busload of families arrives at Kyiv Children's Hospital. They've fled fighting at Vasilkiv, 25 miles northeast of the capital. And they'll now proceed to the relative safety of western Ukraine. But some kids can't leave just yet. 13-year-old Vovo's family tried to go on the 3rd day of the war, but their car was attacked by men thought to be Russian saboteurs or agents. He can't talk because his jaw's been wired together, so he writes down what he wants: a phone, a toy car, a puzzle. I ask his mother to tell me what happened, but she won't say, because she hasn't yet told Vovo that his father was killed in the attack. Now it's just the two of them.
Да, йому вже лучше, йому восстанавливали челюсть, ставили туди пластини. В нього тут ось дирки на ногах, в спині дирка. Така добра, що можна стаканчик поставити. І на нозі, ну там вже зашили, а тут на нозі і на спині будуть сьогодні лізати зшивати, тому що вона така здорова і глибока.
Так, я тобі принесла пазл, я не знаю.
One of the hospital staff brings the things that Vovo wants. He hasn't lost his spirit, and he may be a teenager, but right now he's just a little boy. His mother shows me where the attack happened, just near the hospital. Their car full of their possessions is still there. In war, life and death is a matter of a minute or a few hundred yards. Ivan Gerasimenko found that out last week. Today, his daughters come to see him in hospital.
Такая бомбы были, ну, как бы, волна очень сильная шла. Железная изгородь покорежила совсем, повырывала даже. Они там забетонированы столбы, повырывало. Ну и я первый раз грохнуло, вот это все выбило, а я поинтересоваться хотел, что ж там такое. Иду, и вдруг второй взрыв, ну и вот это все хозяйство. Вот здесь Раз, два, три, четыре, пять раненых.
Tonight, the Russian Ministry of Defense put out these pictures of what they said was an airborne unit advancing on Kyiv. This war has only just started. There is plenty more fighting and suffering to come.
Lindsay Hilson reporting there from Kyiv. Well, earlier I spoke to retired General Philip Breedlove, former NATO Supreme Commander under Barack Obama, and I began by asking him whether he thinks Russia is winning or losing this war.
Well, it's too early to tell, really. I mean, they're beginning now to gather a little momentum in the north where they've been stymied so far, and that's concerning. But as they split and now try to gather that momentum in the north, they're beginning to run into some pretty well-planned and dedicated ambushes. As you saw yesterday, multiple tanks killed passing through a small hamlet.
And what's making the difference here? Is it all these thousands of anti-tank missiles that the West has sent them? Is it the Stinger missiles that the West has sent them? What do you think?
What's making the difference is a professional, dedicated Ukraine military that is determined to fight for its nation. That's what's making the difference. We in the West are sending them weapons, and thankfully, I don't criticize that at all, but Ukraine is standing alone. They are fighting alone.
So the weapons that NATO is sending them are not enough?
All of these weapons that we are sending them are being extremely well used by this Ukrainian force. They are doing a magnificent job with those weapons. But in the end, Ukraine may need more.
So one can never underestimate the importance of spirit rather than military hardware.
And one can never underestimate the spirit of defending your homeland from an invader who is using inhumane tactics all around your country and taking devastating firepower against the people, not the army, against the people.
So we've seen the Russian advance towards the capital stalled. We have had confirmed by the Russians that 3 of their generals have been killed. There are unconfirmed reports of 8 senior officers, generals, being sacked by an irate Vladimir Putin. What does that tell you about the state of command in Moscow at the moment?
Well, I think what it tells me is that in the preparation for this war, there were some bad assumptions and some bad plans made. And if you remember the old axiom of military people that amateurs talk about fighting and operations and professionals talk about logistics, it's very clear that the Russians did not think well about logistics. They have made some assumptions, I believe, that this war was going to be over quick enough that they had enough kit and supply. And now that's very clear that they misjudged that.
Looking at the forces on the ground and the degree of resistance they're getting, realistically, how long will it take for them to try and encircle the capital and possibly control it? This
will not be a short fight. And this military is really doing a masterful job of using these lesser type weapons to effect.
What about Russian air power? Everyone had assumed that Russian air power would be so dominant in this, and we haven't really seen an awful lot of it. Why is that?
Frankly, both the air forces have been rather limited to this point, although I think the Ukrainian Air Force did a valiant job in the beginning and has suffered some losses now. But both air forces are being hampered by some still pretty good surface-to-air missiles that are on the ground protecting. One of the things that the world knows is that attacking a surface-to-air missile network, we call it SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. This is a hard task. And I think that Russia is right now understanding just how hard that task is.
Philip Breedlove, thank you very much indeed for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we were woken up here in the middle of the night by air raid sirens that we haven't heard for several days now. That's because the air war has moved to the west of this country. Russia's widened offensive involved carrying out airstrikes in this region for the second time since the war began. Airfields were hit in the cities of Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk, not far from where I am here in Lviv. In the east, the major industrial town of Dnipro was also targeted for the first time since the beginning of the invasion. And the siege of Ukraine's second city, Kyiv, is getting more severe by the day. And a warning, my report does contain some very distressing images.
Now completely in ruins.
Kyiv, as narrated by one of its intrepid souls, is living two lives these days. One above ground, barely a life, amongst the skeletal ruins of a city rendered uninhabitable by Russian artillery.
So this is what is Kharkiv now today. So hard to see it like this.
And the other life, below ground in the city's metro system. This isn't just a shelter for the night. It's become their home for the war. A bouquet on the ticket gates. The loaf of bread waiting to be sliced. The domestic clutter in front of the adverts, promising a world which now seems even more out of reach. The all-important spaghetti of wires, preserving a line to the world above ground, the world outside. And a guide around what passes here for the best address. The inside of a tube train, marginally warmer than sleeping on the freezing platform.
Тут я сплю, тут вещи стоят. Как-то вот так вот. Тут мы сидим все вместе.
For some, the cramped quarters and lack of sanitation take a medical as well as a mental toll. Nastya has a fever.
За свой дом страшно, за дома своих друзей, за всю Украину страшно, очень даже сильно. Да и за себя страшно.
And if they were able or willing to watch Russia's military TV channel, they would have found this remarkable.
Там реально наши ребята, и донецкие, и луганские, и наши силы спецопераций гибнут сейчас. И наша страна, она...
Не-не-не-не-не!
Нет,
я не хочу это слышать, подождите. Нет,
послушайте,
стойте!
они гибнут все равно.
Стойте!
Они все равно.
The veteran in uniform demanding respect for the fallen, shouted down by the slick host, demanding respect for propaganda fantasy.
Это триумф русского оружия, это триумф русской армии, это возрождение России.
No such turmoil on the face of President Putin today, who met with his only remaining friend, the brow-wiping President Lukashenko of Belarus.
Я, безусловно, проинформирую вас и о ситуации на украинском направлении, и прежде всего о том, как идут сейчас переговоры, которые проводятся сейчас практически на ежедневной основе. Там есть определенные такие позитивные сдвиги, как мне доложили переговорщики с нашей стороны.
He wouldn't specify what he meant by positive, but behind the relaxed mask, Mr. Putin has apparently been losing his temper with the progress of the war. 3 Russian generals killed so far. Which is why he may have asked these men to give a helping hand. Veterans of Syria's vicious war, potentially thousands of them, showing off the Z, the symbol of Russia's invasion, at a rally. Hardened by battle and loyal to President Assad, who, let's face it, owes Moscow a favor. Not willing to be left out, these are special forces from the Central African Republic, here expressing their willingness to head to the frozen fields of Ukraine to fight Ukrainian nationalists.
Nous, soldats africains, nous sommes prêts à aller auprès de nos frères russes.
It is not a world war, not yet, but it is going more global.
Nous, Africains, nous arrivons bientôt. Courage, courage!
Back in Lviv, the human toll of all this madness is felt every day. Here at the church of Peter and Paul, another funeral for a Ukrainian soldier. His name was Andriy Stefaneshin. Whatever the warped justification, this war is the work of a president who is assuming the mantle of a dictator. It has created a living nightmare that is changing all our lives in ways that we're only beginning to discover. Well, the USA and European nations have accused Russia of using the UN Security Council to promote disinformation about the United States funding biological weapons here in Ukraine. Moscow's claim was dismissed as nonsense, but there are fears that it will be used as yet another pretext by Russia to justify its own use of chemical weapons. And a warning, this report from our Washington correspondent Siobhan Kennedy contains images of the aftermath of chemical attacks in Syria that some viewers might find distressing.
It's no secret that the use of disinformation is as much part of Vladimir Putin's battle plan in Ukraine as the use of bombs and missiles. And so it was today that Russia, a country that's used chemical weapons to attempt to assassinate some of its own citizens, convened a meeting of the UN Security Council to unveil what it called direct evidence of military biological activities by the United States and Ukraine.
The Russian Ministry of Defense now has documents which confirms that on the territory of Ukraine there was a network consisting of at least 30 biological laboratories in which very dangerous biological experiments are being conducted, aimed at strengthening the pathogenic qualities of the plague, anthrax, cholera, and other lethal diseases. This work is being done and funded and supervised by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency of the United States.
Russia asked the Security Council for today's meeting for the sole purpose of lying and spreading disinformation.
The US has repeatedly dismissed Russia's allegations as absurd propaganda, which it warns fits the classic Putin playbook.
And we're deeply concerned that Russia's calling for this meeting is a potential false flag effort in action. Russia has a track record of falsely accusing other countries of the very violations that Russia itself is perpetrating. We believe Russia could use chemical or biological agents for assassinations as part of a staged or false flag incident or to support tactical military operations.
Because, of course, Russia has form when it comes to non-conventional warfare, backing the Assad regime in Syria when it used chemical weapons. And don't forget the attempted assassination of Sergei Skripal with the nerve agent Novichok in Salisbury in 2018. Though Russia didn't like being reminded of that in the chamber today.
When my American colleague was throwing thunderbolts and accused us, as we expected, of propaganda, the louder people are trying to shift the blame on us, the greater is our conviction that we hit the nail on the head when we're talking about their nefarious activity in Ukraine.
Utter nonsense. There is not a shred of credible evidence that Ukraine has a biological weapons program.
That was the view of the majority round the table, bar China, who predictably supported Russia's allegation.
China has noted with concern relevant information released by Russia. The concerns raised by Russia should be properly addressed.
But the US said it wouldn't play along with Russia's game.
But we're not going to give any more airtime to the lies that you're hearing today. It's beneath this council, and there's only one aggressor here. And that is Russia.
And that's the real worry, that as Russia's military defence falters, it may resort to using chemical weapons against civilians in Ukraine. And if it does, what would the West do?
Russia would pay a severe price if they use chemical weapons.
But if this war has shown us anything so far, it's a price that Putin has been all too willing to pay.
Well, US intelligence has been very good at exposing Russia's plans so far. What they haven't been so good at is stopping them. And the worry is that's the case here, that Russia is developing chemical weapons for use in Ukraine. So the question then becomes, what will Joe Biden and the West do if they actually use them? Remember, President Obama famously said the use of non-conventional weapons would be his red line in Syria, but then didn't intervene militarily when those weapons were used. You heard Joe Biden there say that Russia would pay a very severe price, he said, if chemical weapons were used. But it's not clear what that price would be. The White House certainly won't talk about red lines this time around, and it's not clear that that would deter Putin anyway. If anything, all the talk of tough sanctions before and during this war have made very little difference.
Siobhan Kennedy in Washington, thank you so much. Well, when the invasion of Ukraine started, China did not openly condemn it. But now it seems Beijing is getting increasingly concerned about this conflict. Earlier, I spoke to Victor Gao, who previously worked closely with former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping and is today close to the government as well. I began by asking him how alarmed China was by Russia's actions.
I think the military conflict or the war in Ukraine is truly alarming to many countries in the world, including China. Why? Because China cares about peace and stability and development and preserving and protecting the lives of the innocent people. And the military conflict is really creating all the dangers and threatening the innocent lives of many people in Ukraine. In this sense, China cares about the situation very much, and China calls on all the parties related to this conflict to de-escalate.
I'm interested, Victor, that you're calling it a war and not a special military operation, which of course is what Moscow is insisting it is called.
Well, I personally will call this a war, and you can call it by any other name, but then the result is very clear. It is causing a lot of casualties. It is causing a lot of injuries. It's taking away lives of many people. In that sense, it's a tragedy, and it needs to be brought to an end. Right now, the most important thing is to encourage negotiation and diplomacy and dialogue rather than pouring more fuel onto this fire with the aim of saving as many people in Ukraine as possible.
And do you think that NATO is pouring more fuel onto this fire?
Russia has drawn a line in the sand. No membership for Ukraine, but whatever cost, all over its dead body. Now, you may decide to disregard this or to heed to this warning, but I would say, out of pragmatism and realism, no one should encourage Ukraine further to consider becoming a member of NATO. I think by today, we all should realize NATO membership for Ukraine should be a dead end. Otherwise, you may really accelerate the unraveling of the situation involving Ukraine to the point of a nuclear disaster. I don't think we should write off the threat of nuclear warfare by Russia today. We should seriously heed to why this warning was made, how we can prevent this warning from happening, how we can save mankind from nuclear holocaust.
Victor, to hear you say that is profoundly chilling, I have to say. But Beijing is perhaps the only capital that Vladimir Putin will listen to at the moment. And it is Russia that has invaded this country, not Ukraine that has invaded Russia. So I wonder, when will your government step in and tell Vladimir Putin that enough is enough, that he is risking the future, as you say, Victor, of the entire planet?
Right now, China has good channels of communication, both with the Russian government as well as with the Ukrainian government. This is really a very rare asset in the world of today, when the world is divided into Camp 1 versus Camp P, which is very, very unfortunate.
So when will you use the asset?
China does not pick and choose one side versus the other, because right now the key is to bring back sanity, bring back rationality, bring back negotiation and diplomacy and dialogue, rather than encouraging one side to deal with the other side by force or by supplying weapons of lethal nature to the other side against the other, because otherwise you are pushing the situation really to the brink of further unraveling, which may trigger another larger disaster. And this disaster will not only be involving the Russians or the Ukrainians in Ukraine, it may really spill out of this country into a global disaster, and which eventually, unfortunately, will lead to a nuclear holocaust. We need to stop this madness. We need to save the Ukrainians, at the same time saving mankind as a whole. This is no longer a very small-scale war. This is a war which may threaten the survival of human species.
Victor Gao, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sobering stuff. What about Vladimir Putin himself? Earlier I spoke to Russian journalist Mikhail Zygar, who is the editor-in-chief of the Russian independent television's channel Dozhd and author of All the Kremlin's Men. I began by asking him if he thought that Putin's inner circle were getting impatient with the president's actions.
His inner circle, or all the people who surround him, they used to not speaking out their minds, but instead they are always trying to guess what he wants them to say. So they are totally fine with everything. In my book, All the Kremlin's Men, I call it the phenomenon of collective Putin. So all of them are Putin. All of them are doing their best to say only what he wants them to say.
So you don't see anyone in that inner circle who could turn against him?
Do I believe that President Putin can be overthrown? No, I don't. I don't see any potential in his inner circle to organize a coup.
I mean, we all want to know about the nuclear option in this, of course, because it affects the whole world. If he were to go that far, what is the process for actually launching some kind of nuclear attack in Moscow? And do you think then one of the men, or perhaps women in his inner coterie, would say, enough is enough, Mr. Putin?
It's always hard to make such forecasts because none of us could ever believe that such a full-scale war is possible. So I guess that hypothetically, there in the Ministry of Defense there should be plans for any occasion, including the nuclear outcome of this war.
Do you really think that Vladimir Putin is capable of going that far?
I've never thought that he is capable to annex Crimea, and I've never thought that he is capable to start the war we're witnessing right now. But you know, many years ago, that was 2013, I was talking with some high-ranking official in Kremlin, and he told me that Russia is obviously losing in the competition with the United States, economically, technologically. So we must just break all the rules and we must change the game. Something catastrophic. That time I was really perplexed, and I didn't understand what he meant. Now I'm thinking of that idea, and I wonder if he was talking about that catastrophic scenario, about a third world war, as a possibility is the only possibility for Russia. I hope not.
Because it also would be a suicide mission for him.
Absolutely, but you know, historically, he has already committed a suicide. There is no doubt about that, and I have no doubts that.
What do you mean by that?
Future generations of Russians will never forgive that. He has destroyed the future for the country.
Do you think it's possible, given what you've just said, that those millions of ordinary Russians, that they will stand up against their president and say enough is enough?
we had protest rallies, peaceful protest rallies, brutally suppressed by the police during all the 20 years of his presidency. So I won't hope for the popular unrest, for the popular revolt within the next few years.
Got to leave it there. Michal Zigar, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.